Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kill You and a Loser channel. It's me, Cam, back with another video for Andy. This one is a full-on follow-up request to my Get Laid While Traveling video. I did say that if people asked for it, I would do a video entirely dedicated to hostels. And yeah, this is the video because like 3 people asked for it, which is quite nice. I'm happy that everyone's just responding positively to my videos. And let's keep rolling. Let's keep giving you guys some practical advice on, how to get laid, how to have fun, how to live an enjoyable life filled with happiness and abundance. And I'm going to stop talking on the preamble and get straight into it. So, I wrote an article a long time ago. It's like the first content I ever made for Andy, actually. This is like 3 years ago now, in the middle of COVID, talking about how to get laid in hostels and why I think hostels are a great idea, especially for those of you that are a bit younger and want to travel. So I'm pitching this at like 19 to 25-year-olds. I'm not prohibiting older guys from doing it this way. I traveled through hostels when I was like 26, 27, 28. So definitely late 20s can do this. I think early 30s too. But I'll talk about this right now in my why do you want to use hostels section. Primarily, it's aimed at guys who are a little bit struggling for funds but still want to travel. They're cheap, basically. And they're definitely very good for countries that you want to travel in, but those countries can be a bit expensive, prohibitively expensive. This is like Europe, North America, like US, Canada, and Australia, those kind of countries where they're fun to travel, but you typically view them as expensive first world countries. They are going to be the only real port of call in those countries if you're a younger dude. That's just the way, because like hostels and Airbnb, sorry, hotels and Airbnbs are going to be like a little less expensive than hotels, but like especially in America, like hotels are like $200 a night in some places. Like some of the best cities to travel to, like Austin's a really good example. Like I remember when I was in Austin, it was either like get a place at this one hostel they had, or every single hotel was like $100 plus, and even the good ones in the city center were like all $200 starting. I always thought there was like motels and stuff in America. It's a complete lie. I couldn't find any like cheap motels these days. So yeah, cheap is the primary reason that I think hostels are good, and they mean that younger guys are able to go and explore countries that they otherwise wouldn't be like prohibited from exploring because of the cost. I also love hostels for social opportunities. Now, the thing about hotels and Airbnbs, traveling on your own, traveling solo, is it can be quite lonely and like hard to make friends. And that's probably why a lot of guys don't go traveling, is because they don't want to be alone. They don't want to go off solo and just be like, feel like they're going to be left alone for the entire time. That was my biggest fear traveling, is I wouldn't make any friends and I'd be stuck on my own without anything to do. And social opportunities also allow us to talk to girls more, to talk to girls, have like easier organic situations where we're going to be talking to more girls, and that's going to help us, if we're trying to get laid while traveling. They are also reliably present in the center of most cities. I've had an issue with getting like Airbnbs. Like sometimes the most affordable Airbnbs are not like where I want them, whereas hostels are always like bang in the center of like downtown. Like that's been my experience of hostels is just the locality is always amazing usually. And there's usually, when it comes to the bigger cities, like 3 or 4 hostels in the really nice tourist downtown parts of those cities where you'd want to go as a traveler. So that's a good like positive over the negatives. So sometimes Airbnbs are like miles away, the affordable ones anyway. Finally, I consider hostels to be the most adventurous choice. That's like a big part of this. Like big part of like, packing all your stuff into a backpack, saving up a little bit of money and then just fucking off and going traveling, like making that big jump, is that it's an adventure. And with hostels, it's like you're throwing yourself in the deep end. You're going to throw yourself in with a bunch of strangers in a dorm room somewhere in like a communal kind of like living environment, and you're going to see how you do. And like a part of that, there's part of like hotels and Airbnbs where you can just kind of like hide yourself away and like not go out and explore and not go out and meet people. You don't have that in hostels. Like you are basically forced to meet people. And I've seen people who aren't very good at this, like they crumble a little bit when they first arrive in these situations and get overwhelmed. But then they get through it with the exposure therapy of being in that situation and they move on. So I think it's an incredibly adventurous choice for younger people to make who may have some social anxiety, some social fear, and just get you over that stuff. Now, in the last video, I did say that I don't really do hostels anymore. That's more of like a personal choice now. There's also logistical issues with hostels, which I'll touch on later. That's very relevant to getting laid in them. But the main reason I personally don't do it anymore is it's a nightmare to shoot content and to coach like over Zoom in hostels. It's just absolutely nightmare. I had a run on my own channel where I was doing stuff in hostels, and it was just difficult to find like a time on my own to like shoot anything in like this 12-man dorm I was staying in. It was really difficult to do Zoom calls using the hostel Wi-Fi, and I couldn't find any cafes that were worth doing it in. And yeah, it was just a massive stress. And any of my clients who are working with me during that time will know how stressed I was about trying to get like these Zoom calls done in like a communal room where I was talking about, guys, this is how I'm going to dress you to get laid more. And like I had like 4 people around me when I was saying that stuff in like a hostel kitchen. So it was just kind of annoying. So now I don't personally stay in hostels. I am a little bit older. I have more money. But it's still something that I did for a long part of my traveling life. I think I spent about a year total in hostels overall. And I know people who've done more than that as well. Like in Australia, we had long-term hostels, and you were basically able to stay there like a rent agreement for like several months. And I've got friends who did 3 years in hostels during like the COVID situation. They'd spend 3 years entirely just living in hostels and working in hostels as well. And that brings me on to like another little bit I need to explain about hostels before I get into like how to get laid in them. There's 2 types of hostels really. There's long-term hostels and short-term stay hostels. And we're only going to be really talking about short-term stay hostels. Long-term are a thing. They mostly exist in countries which have really big backpacking cultures. So like Australia, there's a huge backpacking community that kind of moves around the whole country in this cycle. And yeah, that's where you'll be find people who've been living in hostels for like months. But most of the places you travel will not have that situation. They're mostly going to be short-term hostels that have like a cap on how long you can stay there. That's been my experience in America. So like the short-term hostels are like 3-week stay max, unless you're working in the hostel. So yeah, those are what I'm going to be talking about mostly, like these like weekend hostels, these places you go for like a week because you're checking out a new area. Okay. I don't want any cuts in these videos. So I'm going to be looking, you might have noticed I'm looking at my notes like a lot. And like Andy doesn't really do cuts. So let's just like allow me to talk naturally. So regards to getting laid in hostels when you stay there, as always, the basics still matter most. Look good, talk to girls, brackets, and have good logistics. That is a simple trick to getting laid more. If you have already maxed out your looks and you can approach girls like cold approach, then you are head and shoulders above most of the other young guys that are traveling. That's just the way it is. That's all you really need to be ahead of them. When I got most of my experience in terms of how to get laid in hostels, how to make friends, how to have a good time, I had no idea of that. I was not maxed out at all. I actually probably looked the worst I'd ever looked because I was traveling on a really unhealthy lifestyle. I was nowhere near my peak. And I didn't have much in the way of balls when it came to talking to girls and trying to get laid. And I still did really well. I still got laid plenty of times traveling in those hostels. And for a decent chunk of my hostel stay starting out, I was like monogamous too to someone, and I was staying faithful. So in a small amount of time, I did really well almost by accident. So imagine how well you can do if you're just already above most guys when it comes to the balls to talk to girls and the looks that will get you attention from women. We'll talk about logistics. So talking to girls is really the interesting part. Obviously, how you look, how you present yourself, that's the work you do beforehand. But talking to girls is definitely very interesting. Now, obviously, if you're just using the hostel as a place to stay, like a base, and you're not really like talking to anyone in the hostel, it's just going to be standard night game with like some interesting logistical issues because you're living in a dorm room. So there is that. You can just do that. You stay in a hostel. You're not really interested. You go and hit the bars nearby. That's completely standard. That'd be like a night game situation. But I'm really focusing on if you want to get with girls who are also in the hostel, if you want to talk to the girls who are staying in the hostel too, especially with like big party cities, Miami, in North America anyway. Miami has a great hostel situation. They're quite cheap. New Orleans is really good for this. I actually rate the ones in Vegas, but apparently they've gone downhill in a lot of, I'll talk about that maybe later. There are some of these big party cities. There's going to be tons of hostels. I know in Mexico as well, in like Cancun and places like that, you can find hostel situations. Puerto Vallarta has some good hostels I stayed in as well. Australia, especially if you go to the cities with the the big party reputations. Yeah, those are the situations where you're going to have other girls staying in the hostel with you who are there for a good time, and they are the perfect girls to go and approach and talk to and get to know. So it's in that situation, it's warm approaching. It's not quite cold approaching. It's very similar to like college, I'd say, or high school, or yeah, college is the better example because you were like older and you like lived on campus. So like it's warm approaching. So you kind of know of the girls and you like they know that you're staying in the same place. So you have to do it. It's social and party game, which I've talked about on my own channel before. It requires you to be a little bit more socially aware of the situations. You can't just go spam cold approaching in like a social party game situation. It's got to be a little bit more indirect at times, and it's more about like making friends with like as many people as possible and like having girls know who you are, so later on you can, you know, make moves, try and see if you can get with them later on in like more of a like going out party situation. And that's what hostels are really good for, is their events, because a lot of them will, especially in like Miami and places like that, a lot of them will be gearing towards taking the people in the hostel out, so like bar crawls or clubs. Even in the daytime they have like city walking tours. So that's the big thing about the hostels, is they're like kind of like throw these events where they try and make money and try and like send people to the bars nearby. These are great because you basically get a like pre-party like set up for you in the hostel, and you can meet the girls then and you can meet other people then. This is why I also say make friends with the staff in the hostel, like the people who'll be running these events. Every time I've had a great experience in a hostel, I was on good terms with the staff that were in the hostel there. A lot of the staff, they tend to get paid in return for being able to live there, if that makes sense. So they're doing the work, but they're like work to stay. So you'll meet a lot of people in hostels who are running the front desk or cleaning, who are also will be staying in the rooms with you as well. That's typically how a lot of hostels run and operate with their staff. So a good example of this is when I first moved to a hostel in Sydney. I like saw that the guy who was running the desk, he actually turned out to be a guy who was like running most of the hostel. He was lonely, or he looked lonely. He was playing guitar. He was on his own, and so I went and bought him a McFlurry and just hung out with him. And like he turned into one of my better friends at that hostel. And like the benefit of that is that he knew where the private rooms were, and he would give you a key if you needed one. And everyone knew who he was, and he would introduce me to people. See the benefits of like knowing the staff is like you get these little like kickbacks because you know the staff. And if you're just some random dude that they don't know who they are, it's like you may not even like notice when the events are going, or you may not even know, like you won't get the introductions and stuff like that. So it really does pay to be nice to the staff, and if you can, befriend them if you're good at that stuff. Like I said with pre-partying, your goal should be to like build a temporary like friend group in that hostel as well. Like if you're there from like Thursday till the next Monday, there'll be other people there for the weekend, and you can like screen for like who is like seems like a good like good for a night out, you know, good for like what you want to do. Are they looking to get laid as well? So like if you've got another couple of guys who are looking to meet girls too, that can be really helpful. So if you can build a temporary friend group that you can do fun stuff with, like go out in the daytime and then go out in the nighttime, that gives you like, you know, the social credit of having like a big social circle, even though you've only just met everybody. This has been my secret in terms of like how I got laid a lot, was I would build like a big friend group that girls in the hostel would want to be part of, and then you had a situation where you could talk, like, you know, talk to the girls individually and meet them, and eventually, you know, isolate and get laid. Works really well. This is what party game is. You know, party game is warm approaching, isolating, getting laid with girls. That's all it is. The reason it's warm approaching is because you kind of have an introduction already. So it's not the same as cold approach where you have to like build like rapport and social like whatever. It's just you go in there, it's kind of already accepted that they should be talking to you, and then you can build it from there. So yeah, at some point, if you're on like a night out, bar crawl, whatever, your idea is like any night game essentially. I think Chris talked about this in Good Looking Loser. It's about isolating yourself and the girl you're interested in from everybody else, and then making a move. And that's typically how most most party game stuff works. This is relatively easy. You kind of, if they're into you, you should be able to pick up signs, and then you just kind of like hey, do you want to go like over here in the kitchen, whatever? Do you want to move like outside for a smoke? Because what I used to do when I smoked. And at some point you just go for a kiss and she either lets you kiss her or she doesn't. And that's where you figure it out. Yeah. It's all about making the move, which puts the girl to a decision. And then from there, it's if they're not like super drunk or they're like more interested in going and hanging out with other people or whatever, you should have like a good tie-in to potentially like take her somewhere, take her to the dorm and have sex. Which brings me to logistics. This is the main point I want to talk about with hostels. They have the best and worst logistics in the fucking world. Because, I mean, you're in a big building with a lot of beds. But that's kind of the problem. It's dorms, yeah? That's the biggest issue. And the question comes down to like how much of an exhibitionist are you? Like how much of an exhibitionist are you and how willing is the girl as well to have sex in a dorm full of people? You'll meet a lot of girls that don't care, but you'll meet a lot of girls that do. And it's up to you whether you care or not as well. Like me personally, I was never that much of like a fan of having sex in dorm rooms. I really wasn't. I've done it a few times. Primarily, I had sex in dorm rooms with girls I've been seeing for a while. There's one girl in particular I had sex with quite a few times in dorm rooms, but it's because like she was just staying over and like sex happened. And like I remember apologizing to my roommates the other day because I thought it was something I never really liked doing. But yeah, lots of people don't care. You'll definitely stay in dorm rooms in hostels where people are just fucking really loudly and like it's actually considered, especially in the long stay hostels, it's considered really rude to keep everyone awake having sex. But like, yeah, on like a Friday or a Saturday night when everyone's out drinking, like it's half expected that you're going to pull a girl back or couples are going to come back and have sex in hostels. Like this stuff happens, yeah? People want to have sex. So there are ways around this. Most hostels have private rooms. The problem with private rooms is they cost like $100. So you really have to be certain that sex is going to happen before you put down $100. I was always scared of putting down money for a private room and having the girl like pull out at the last minute. Every time though that I bought a private room just to hook up with a girl, it like came off. So it's not like it's a risk technically. And like my friend has done it last minute. I remember when I was staying in Budapest with my mate and we were actually in the room with the girl he hooked up with was actually the roommate. So it was two girls and two guys. And I, like a good friend, occupied the other girl and then he wanted to have sex with the other girl. But they didn't want to do it in the room with both her friend and me, his friend, in the room. So at like 1 a.m, he was like, went to the front desk and was like, yo, you got a room? And they were like, yeah, 150 euros. Because it was 1 a.m. or whatever. And like, he was like, fine. And it was like, yeah, he was very like, he was very salty about that the next day that he had to spend 150 euros because she sure as hell didn't put any money in for that. But yeah, no, it is possible to get private rooms last minute if the hostel's not super full and you don't want to have sex in a dorm. If you're going to have sex in a dorm, there are things you can do. Like you can put a towel up, like if you're on a bottom bunk, definitely recommend the bottom bunk. Always try and grab bottom bunks. The other thing to do is put towels between the bed and the wall so it doesn't make as much noise. But you'll find a lot of hostels have like very rickety bunk beds. So that is a problem. The other one I said before is if you're friends with the staff, I did know staff at a couple of hostels I stayed in Australia where they would give me keys to the private rooms because I was their friend. This is like you have to be there for a while and make friends with people kind of thing before you can pull something off like that. The other thing is finding private areas to have sex around the hostel. But this is just like going out to like the beach or a wood or a park or something, which I've known people to do that. Like one of my friends was notorious for having sex in parks with the girls in the hostel. Like he didn't want to have sex in the hostel. So he was like, let's go to the park. Oh my God. What a legend. Anyway. Yeah, the logistics of figuring out where you're going to have sex in the hostel is the biggest issue. You have so much opportunity in terms of there's all these like girls around. You get warm approach for all the girls because they already kind of know who you are because you're staying there. You get a pre-party for nights out. You get to build your own little temporary friend groups where everyone wants to have fun and they're in a good mood. But then you have to figure out where the hell you're going to have sex because you're not in a hotel or an Airbnb. And that's that's fun. That's the fun of being in hostels. That's the down and dirty fun of it all. And that's why I love hostels because they're chaotic. They put you in these weird situations where you got to figure it out. They put you in odd social situations where you're going to get a lot of exposure therapy to interesting social situations. You're going to learn how to spot when people are into you or they're not. You're going to learn how to make moves, or you're not going to have any sex at all. They're like the furnace that will turn you into a hyper sociable guy. And I love that about them. There were some notes I wanted to end with that I've received in terms of feedback from my original hostel guide. Someone asked, can like older guys travel? I think I covered this a little bit earlier, but yes, you can. Some hostels have age caps though, like 35 usually. And like some places are 30. I remember I was traveling, some places capped at 30, which was never a problem to me before, but now I have turned 30. The other one is depending on the part of the world you're in. So someone messaged me about Southeast Asia, and I haven't personally traveled Thailand, Vietnam, those places. They said hostels tend to be not the best shout in those countries because they often ban you from taking people back. This is something else as well. Some hostels will, if you're bringing someone back to the hostel who is not from the hostel, sometimes hostels aren't keen on that in a lot of places, and they can be difficult to bring people back in, especially actually here in Vancouver. It's very hard to get people who aren't staying in certain hostels back into the hostel in some of them. And Southeast Asia apparently is quite like that. Also in Southeast Asia, the hotels and Airbnbs are so cheap that it's sometimes better just to stay in those. And if you see a more expensive hostel, those tend to be better apparently. But I don't want to talk too much about that. I would do your own research. Go check out some of the stuff on my original article as well. What else did I want to talk about? I think that's about it. If anyone has any questions, leave them in the comments. Yeah, I think it's really hard to cover this in super depth without going on for like 2 hours. But I think I covered most of it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this, and peace out till next video.